It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Jared Thibodeau. Jared is a bilingual, cross-certified instructor with hands-on implementation experience and over 20 years of IT consulting and teaching experience. From instruction to courseware, customization, and development, Jared has the skills in and out of the classroom to ensure success. Jared teaches, is certified, and has authored courses in Windows, Windows Server, SharePoint, System Center, Cloud, VMware, and Hyper-V Virtualization. Jared, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Brent, and welcome everybody. It looks like we've got a good group today for this session. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here on an overview of the SCCM architecture. Now, again, being that we're limited in time, we can't cover all aspects of it. So it's definitely a high-level overview of different aspects of SCCM and a lot of the pieces that most administrators use kind of day to day. Now, the first thing that we talk about, in this kind of, brief webinar is, querying and our ability to retrieve information from, our systems, our user objects, our collections, whatever it may be. And our query capabilities with SCCM are extremely granular, very detailed, very, specific as to the type of information that I want to retrieve. Now, again, a query is our ability to extract information, right? And we query anything from, the operating system information, the hardware on the machine, what type of user objects are present. I mean, we have so much in the way of query, attributes that we can use that you can spend, days just customizing your queries to return the information that you want, from your environment. Now, when we look at, these queries, there are what we call objects, and of course, each object includes additional attribute classes. And beneath those attribute classes are the actual attributes themselves. So they give the example here of, a system resource being the object type, the processor or the disk drives being the attribute class, and then the subsequent attributes beneath them, of course, are things like, clock speed for the processor, manufacturer, what partitions of the drives I have. Now, these are fairly easy to configure. The great thing about querying is that, it's really just a more of a time-consuming, process of going through and really selecting the information that you want to see. So the first thing I need to do is I need to drill down into my monitoring workspace. So I'm going to go down into my bottom workspaces here into monitoring, and then from monitoring we're going to see our queries. Now, under the queries, you're going to have some pre-canned, kind of default queries out there that Microsoft kind of pre-creates for us, and we can use them as needed. And you can see, everything from mobile devices to all client systems. I mean, they're very kind of generic and quite broad in their scope, right? So there's not a lot of very specific queries here. And if I want to go through and create my own custom query, I'm simply going up and creating a query. And then I'm taking the time here. Let's just say, for example, I'm going to use system, OS and hardware info, let's say, as my query name. And now I'm going to either import a query statement or edit the existing query, or my new query statement. Now, if you have queries out there that you've downloaded, in what we call WMI format, now WMI being the Windows Management Instrumentation, allows us to query so many different aspects of our systems and our environment. I mean, everything from, again, operating system to hardware to, service packs and patches. I mean, you can use this for so many different reasons. And if you've got a well-built query that you just simply want to import, you can do so. However, if you just want to build it from scratch, you're choosing your object types. And you can see here I've got, I think 20 somewhat odd different object types that I can add, everything from, user resources to, use security roles. I've got, everything from system resources to, packages, programs, deployments. Now, in this case here, I'm going to use my system resource, and I'm going to go ahead and target and edit that query statement to, whatever it is I'm looking for. So let's give this a second here to kind of catch up with me. There we go. And I'm coming down to my little star here, and I'm now going to begin the process of adding the different attribute classes and the subsequent attributes. So we can see here that in the attribute classes, I mean, I've got system resources, I've got, tape drive, USB controllers. I can go into, how much, the processor information, memory info, power management. I mean, you can see here, there are hundreds of different attribute classes that I could interrogate, right? And I want to use that to kind of build my, to retrieve specific attributes, right? So if I come down and I say, I want to look at operating system information, here are the available attributes that I can retrieve from that specific class of attributes, right? So I've got, here's my build type, build number, and I'm simply adding in those attributes, determining their sorting, ascending, descending. And once I've added that attribute in, I'm coming back and I'm doing the same thing over and over again, right? So in this case here, I want operating system, and I want not only the build number, but I also want, maybe the, language, number of processes, SKU. I mean, really and truly, I can retrieve so much information here, right? Free physical memory, free virtual memory. So I'm going to just pull, let's say free, physical memory remaining on the machines, and sort that as well in ascending format. And then I'm going to come in and, keep adding these different attributes, right? It could be something related to, non-system resource. It could be a service that I'm looking for. So you kind of get the gist here of what I'm saying is that, it's extremely deep, extremely granular, and allows you to be, very specific about what type of information you want to retrieve. Now, I could spend all day just talking about the different attributes and classes, and, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through all of that, but you can see here just how powerful this is, right? And we have the ability to add additional criteria, so we can scope down the query a little bit. Could be that we want to target, maybe all users within a specific group, or all users or computers within a specific OU, right? We can, filter this based on the type of operating system that it is, what version. I mean, we can be, again, very specific about the criteria that must be met before this query can be run on those systems or against those user objects. And then finally, I've got my joins, which shows me, what inner joins, what, configuration of my query I've done. And I also have the ability to look at that in what we call WQL format, which is the actual query language that's used by WMI to query that information, right? So I can see here, there's my build number, there's my free physical memory. So I'm happy with my query, and I now want to limit that down to a collection. We also have to think about this because, if I'm limiting this to, let's say, all systems, right? Well, that could mean, depending on how large of an organization you work in, could mean 100,000, 200,000 machines, right? So we really want to be careful about the reach of this query. I want to scope that down a little bit and make sure that, maybe I'm only targeting all my Windows 10 workstations, or only a specific collection of systems, so that I'm not overloading the system with queries, query information, because it can, again, if this is a really large query against hundreds of thousands of systems, you can imagine the impact that's going to have on not only the performance, but the bandwidth, and all the other aspects of, my environment. So now I've built my query, I'm happy with that, and I'm now going to go in and I'm going to generate that query, and I'm going to run, that against my systems. So in this case here, I drill down into my system OS and hardware, and I run that query, and it should now retrieve the information it can from whatever systems I've targeted. Now, in this case here, I think I only have like one client machine running Windows 10. So it only came back with a build number, and I don't think because it's a virtual machine, it didn't pull all of the information. But again, these queries need to be kind of customized and catered to your needs and what kind of information. You can just imagine how much info you can pull from this, right? So a very powerful piece of of SCCM is that ability to query, the 29 different object types, and then the hundreds of different attributes that are available beneath that, and as well the attribute classes. Now you can see here in their query, I mean, they've got everything from, IP addresses, subnets, I mean, Active Directory site name, operating system name, and, a ton of different, attributes and classes that they're targeting in this specific query. Now, when we talk about this new tool that was added back in the, I think the 1806 version of SCCM, yeah, 1806, so it's right there on the screen. This is a new kind of real-time query tool that Microsoft introduced with that version that allows us to target collections in real time with queries. And this is a great feature because, oftentimes, we have to build the query, we have to then go in and run the query, and, we may not be running it at the exact time we want to. It might take a little bit longer for us to generate the query itself. So what I can use is the CMPivot tool to go in and target, the different systems I have within, different collections. Now, if I go down to, let's say all my Windows servers, I only have 7 of them here. So I'm going to go ahead and target my all Windows servers. I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to go to Start CMPivot. Now, once I launch into my CMPivot tool, it's going to give me some default kind of, queries that I can generate and some good guidance on how to build, these queries based on, the language structure of the CMPivot tool. Now we can see here we've got the pipeline character. So for those of you familiar with PowerShell, this is what we call the pipeline character. And this allows us to target an entity and then provide operators. And the operators are ultimately what actions we want to perform or what information we want to retrieve. Now, the great thing is they give you kind of some default queries here. So everything from, let's say I want to find all local administrators. I want to find out the BIOS information of a system. Maybe I want to find out, file share or ipconfig and configuration. Now, we've got hundreds of these, and you can see here are all of the entities that we can query, right? So everything from battery to BIOS information to whether or not, how much memory we have on the machine, disk space, operating system info. And so if I want to use one of these queries, well, I can either choose my entities and build the query myself manually, or I can use some of these pre-canned queries like, the example they give us here, which is device piped into a where objects manufacturer is like Microsoft. And so in this case here, we want to look for all devices that are manufactured by Microsoft. So if I go ahead and I run that device query, it's going to go out and run that real time against the systems in that collection, and then bring back the device information, model, manufacturer, domain, and username. And so as long as those systems are online, which in this case here, I think only 2 of those systems will be online, maybe even 1, just the way that this lab is structured. But, we're going to get back some information about, the details we queried against that machine. Now, the great thing about these queries is that they can not only be used to retrieve real-time information, but can also be used to create collections. And what's great about this is, let's say, for example, we've just received an alert that there's a, security patch that must be applied to, our systems to maintain high levels of security. Well, I can quickly go in and query the updates and service packs, in which systems are compliant with a certain, let's say service pack or a certain update number. And if those systems, those systems that are not compliant or do not have that update will be listed in my query here. And then I can use that to go in and create a collection of objects. And this now defines their membership in that collection. And I can then target them with a deployment of, let's say, that update that we absolutely require right away. No, I mean, you can imagine this can be used for so many different reasons, right? I mean, the level of, again, depth and granularity here is really quite, powerful. So it gives us so much capability in going in and retrieving that information that we require. It's a fantastic tool, definitely something that is worth its weight in gold for, a lot of administrators that, are kind of tired of building these queries, and then having to go in and run them and then, not being able to do this very quickly and on the fly. So this gives you kind of a quick, easy tool to use to go in and, generate a query and target your systems immediately, right? Very nice little tool, CMPivot. Now, as we spoke about, the CMPivot tool is interacting real time, right? So it allows us to build, collections or, export those results out to CSV files, but the queries will time out in about an hour. And it's only temporarily stored information. So it's not going to be maintained within the database over time. And that way it doesn't bloat up your databases. It just simply retrieves the info, temporarily stores it for you, so you can use it, and then it's wiped from the database. So you're not taking up all that space, right? Great little feature set. Now, when we talk about another major facet of SCCM, one of the original reasons why SMS, the original product was created was for inventory, right? Was one of the better inventory tools, to find out what we had out there, and what types of systems and hardware and software we had out there. Now, the inventory collection is run automatically when a system is added to the SCCM architecture and has a client installed. The software inventory is not run immediately, so it normally is based on a schedule, usually about 7 days. Every 7 days, it's going to perform a software inventory. And then, I now have this information that I can use to, of course, build, queries against and find out, which systems have what hardware, what operating systems, whatever it may be. And I can also use that to create, collections, all different types of, aspects of our inventory can be used for things like software, monitoring, who's using what, when, and where. Are they actually using the product, or do we, can we remove it? And also, and that's what we refer to as software metering. We can also provide asset intelligence data. And that means, like, how many systems have this application? How many licenses do we have? Are users actually using that application, or can we pull back a few licenses because many people are not using the product? What types of products do we have? Is it Adobe? Is it Microsoft? Is it, Tivoli? Whatever products we have out there, we can query and then build this massive database of our applications and their hardware requirements, the different aspects and properties associated to them. Now, again, as I mentioned, some of these things, the tasks that we can use this inventory for is, building queries, building collections, creating reports, maintaining our corporate standards, collecting files, troubleshooting client issues, allows us for a lot of control of that, and use of that information. And of course, is really quite useful when we're dealing with a lot of systems within the environment. Now, an initial full inventory is always performed again upon installation. And so once that SCCM client is installed, I can drill down to any one of my devices and just check to make sure that the device is responding. And we can see here that my client check, if I go into my SCCM console, that my client check result has passed. So I know the system is properly communicating with the client and the server. I've got a heartbeat DDR, which just tells me that the system is responding and is actually communicating with the server. And I can see here that the hardware scan was run back in 2019 at 11:46 a.m. Now, of course, this is a little skewed because that's originally when I think these labs were modified and created. So we could run a manual hardware scan if we wanted to, just to make sure we have fresh hardware information. Now, once that hardware inventory is performed, we're simply going to the client, down to our start item, and then into our resource explorer. And from there, we're going to now see all the hardware information associated to that machine. You can see here I've got everything from CD-ROM information to disk drives. I've got operating system information. So you can imagine now I can use all that when I'm generating queries, when I'm building reporting to reports for this. I can now pull all that information, and find out all Windows 10 Enterprise editions I have with build number 177763. I can look at all systems with a specific type of network adapter attached to their machines, because we have to update them. I mean, you can really imagine just the use of this information, right? Now, this is, of course, wiped out of the databases every, so often, depending on the schedule you define. And if we, we also keep this information for a period of time, it allows us to look at historical modifications to those systems. So if I want to know, what this server had, a week ago versus what it currently has, well, I can go to the original, hardware inventory. And on that date, back in 2019, I could see that, this one had a total of 2 gigs of memory. And currently, well, if it had changed since then, it would be different than the 2 gigs, of course. But, in this case here, I could look to see if there were, increases in the memory on the machine, or modifications to service packs or updates or whatever it may be. So great little tool. And, once our software inventory is performed, then the software inventory will return us, different files that it retrieved, file details, product detailed information, and we can then use that with, again, things like software metering, right? Tracking the use of specific applications, look at assets and what applications they have and whether they're licensed. I mean, again, really useful for, those purposes. Now, software inventory collects information directly from the header, and, it collects details from all files, but we are able to, of course, go in and customize that inventory a little bit, kind of remove, things that we don't want inventoried, add things that are not, inventoried by default, and really ensure that we're only collecting that's what's pertinent to our organization. Now you can, of course, as I mentioned, run these inventory cycles yourselves manually. So all we simply have to do is go down into the control panel. And then from the control panel, we can simply go in and run our configuration manager client, which I'm just going to quickly demonstrate here. So down into my large icons, configuration manager here. And then of course we go to our actions tab. And in the actions tab, we're just simply going to run that hardware inventory and our software inventory cycle. Even the software metering as well is good to run. Once that's done, file collection can be run as well. Now that should update that system and provide us with the freshest information about, those systems specifically. Now, as we saw, the report viewer and reporting services from SQL can be used, but it's not the most intuitive or, useful. I mean, I've never been a big fan of using that. So, as I demonstrated, the Resource Explorer is the tool to go to, for most administrators when they're looking at reviewing hardware and software-based inventory. Okay. Now, when we talk about, SCCM, one of the biggest draws to this product, of course, is the deployment and management of our applications, right? And this has changed, quite a bit over time, especially since 2007. I mean, we've become more, user-centric with this product. The product used to be much more device-centric, which meant that, we targeted more, systems than users with deployment of applications and what have you. But over time, as users got more and more devices, right? I've got users that have a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, and a phone. We started to get to a point where, it no longer became as much device-centric, but more targeted towards the user, right? So that the user could choose which device they want to install, which applications they can, manage their own devices and, manage some of the configuration. They can select from available applications we provided to the organization. And, we kind of put the onus on them a little bit to, be able to go in and manage their own apps. Now, that's different in every organization. I mean, I have certain organizations that, do that and allow the user to pick and choose. I've got other organizations that are very restrictive and they define what the user gets or does not get. And there's no real choice there. It's really defined by the, the admins and the security configuration of the systems. Now, when we talk about, the difference between an application and a package, more often than not, you'll hear this user versus device-centric, and user-centric is application, contains built-in intelligence. It can allow the users to kind of, pick and choose from the apps, and, we can make them available and publish them. Whereas packages really are more targeted towards devices, or are more, referred to as device-centric. With that said, you can still target a user with a package, but more often than not, we'll target them with application. Now, when we look at, the information contained within a, an application versus a package, well, an application software information is included. The software support and extended support information is included as part of the app. And our deployment is, defined, the software command options are defined by the deployment types versus the programs for packages. And then we look at, deployments can be defined by application or package. We define the deployment type to be used and what, based on what requirements. And there's a revision history that's maintained. So we can track, supersedence and, the, deprecation of older products that are no longer being used and moving over to newer products that we're, publishing out there. Now, the Software Center for me was a great improvement. I found that this was a great, addition to System Center. And this now, again, is that kind of, location where, users can go to pick up on applications that we've, published out there and that we've, sent out to the organization for, access. And, if it's available to them, they can, simply go in, install it. But if it's, requires approval, then a user can request the application, and then an administrator would be required to approve that application, right? Now, it's easy to set these up. I mean, when we're looking at application deployment, not too much has changed here. There's a lot of features and so on, but, if we're looking at deploying a new application, I'm simply, going into my application list within my software library workspace. And then from there, I'm going in and creating an application. And then what I want to do here is go in and define what type of application. Now, applications can range from, Microsoft installers to, AppV, virtual applications, APPX bundles. We look at things like APK files and IPAs for, iOS. So you have a lot of, flexibility here when you're dealing with different platforms and different system types. In this case here, I'm going to be deploying to standard Windows-based systems. So I'm going to use an MSI file. And then I'm going to go in and define where that file resides. So I'm going to go ahead and find out where that installer is. And where am I here? Interesting. Why is this system not have my installation package? That's a very strange thing here. Let me just browse out and see. There we go. Go over that. Huh. Very interesting. For the first time ever, this thing seems to be causing a little bit of a fault on me here. Just bear with me one sec here, guys. I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water at the same time. All right, sorry about that, guys. So, for some magical reason, of course, today, of all days, my system is not showing me my application store. So it seems like I've run into a little bit of a snag there. But I do have one application that's already been added for me. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. In this case here, I've got an XML notepad that is currently just sitting there. It hasn't been deployed yet. It's been added to the server. So now what I need to do is I need to go through and make sure I've configured the deployment for that. Now, before I deploy it, I need to distribute this to make sure that, all of my systems, specifically my distribution points, which are responsible for sending this application out, I need to make sure they have the application. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute that out to all of my distribution points, make sure it's staged and ready to go for my deployment. So here I'm going to go in, add in my distribution points. I think I only have one in this case here. So yeah, there's my London CFG. I'm going to add that config man box in, and then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that's completed successfully. Looks good. So now what I need to do is I need to get ready for this deployment. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right click and deploy. And I'm now going to target my collections, right? So in this case here, I've got a client machine sitting in the collection there, client 1C. So I'm going to go ahead and target my client collections here. All right, device collection, I'm going to use all my Windows 10s. Perfect. And now the content that I'm distributing, right? I can see here that it's on my distribution point, and I can add any additional distribution points if I need to. In this case here, I only have one, so that's fine. And now I'm going to go ahead and install this application. We can choose to uninstall if I'm removing applications. In this case here, I want to install it. It's being made available, but I can make it required, right? And required, of course, ensures that it's installed regardless of whether the user, interacts with it or wants it. And we can even do things like sending wake-up packets to, wake up that machine prior to the deployment of the application. In this case here, I'm just going to make it available for my user base. And then I'm going to go ahead and, deploy that right away so that all of my systems get it immediately. But I can, of course, define that based on a schedule. And then now in this case here, I want to display it in the software center. And I want to show all notifications, not only just for restarts, but also for, anything else that occurs during the deployment. I'm going to commit this at a deadline or during my maintenance window to make sure that it's, for my Windows embedded devices. And then I'm going to generate some alerts just in case anything starts to fail. I think above 60% failure, I want to be notified and alerted if there's, if there's issues with my deployment. So now I'm going to finish up that config, and that application is now off to the races and is now being deployed to my client machine. Now, the best thing to do here, if I want this to, to occur very quickly, is of course to run my evaluation cycles from my client machine. So I'm just going to log on to my Windows 10 box here. Slowly but surely. All right, so let me see. All right, so this is taking way too long for me. I'm just going to give that a second. I'll come back to that. And so we've gone in, we've added, we've deployed the application. Now we're defining, we define the deployment type, and we configured all the different, deployment configuration, the, user experience, the, detection methods. And I mean, there's a lot more to this, than what we're seeing here today, of course, because we just don't have time to delve into it in too much detail. But, you kind of get the gist, and we can choose, whether it's install for a user, install for the system, how we want that installed on those machines. Now, you can install for the system and you can install for users, right? And if you install for system, it installs for every user of that system. However, if you deploy it to the user, it only gets installed for that specific user account, right? So we can see here, all users have it when it's installed for system, but only users that are targeted will actually get the application when you're going user-centric. Now, what we're doing now is, we've created the application, we're creating the deployment, which we just did, and now we are basically, the client is, checking for the policy update, downloading the policy and the content from the distribution point, and then installing that content on the system. Let's go back here and see. There we go. So now let me just jump into my control panel here. And I'm also at the same time just going to bring up my software center because it might have already popped up for us. So let's have a look. Slowly but surely here. So let's see if we can see that XML viewer tool. I don't know if it'll be there yet, but it might be. Nope, not quite yet. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my configuration manager client, and I'm going to go ahead and run my two actions here, one of them being the machine policy retrieval and the user policy retrieval. Okay, so these are the two quickest and easiest ways. You can also choose to run the application deployment evaluation cycle. I'm going to do that as well. And then I'm going to give it a couple minutes and, kind of twiddle my thumbs, wait for a few, refresh this little console, and, eventually that application will pop up for me. And I now, can choose to install it if I want, right? So nice feature set. Now, there's been a new feature that was added in 1806 as well called the phase deployments. And I really think that this was a huge benefit to to the, types of, the styles of deployments that we have. In the old days, if you wanted to do a phase deployment, you had to create multiple deployment types based on scheduling, and, you would deploy them, to collection after collection, based on those different deployments. With phase deployments, you can add 2 phases for applications and up to 10 phases for software updates. And that means that I can have the first phase target, let's say, my IT guys, so they can test things out, make sure everything's working. And then my second phase would be, all my general users. Now, again, for applications, you're somewhat limited to 2, but with updates, which is exactly where we really want this, this ability, you can create up to 10 different phases. So I can have one phase that targets my, test computers for 30 days. I've, got, 30 days later, we target all of our IT systems, and then 30 days later, we target all of our, let's say sales, and then marketing, and then, down the line. So we can phase that out, phase it in different, intervals to ensure that it's being tested, verified, validated before, the next phase begins. It's actually a really great feature and is so important when you're dealing with software updates. I think that this is, one of the best pieces of software updates. Now, software updates, again, one of the most important pieces of SCCM when you're dealing with environments, I mean, is making sure your systems are updated, making sure they're compliant with the most recent update requirements, And this, of course, falls back to, us using SCCM or WSUS to do so. Now, with these two products together, I mean, you're getting a full suite of capabilities, good reporting capabilities, seamless and flexible updates. You can adhere to maintenance windows. You've got new, what we call automatic deployment rules, which are great for automating deployment of things like critical or security updates. And I mean, you've got Wake on LAN, third-party update support now, new phase deployments. And so you've got a lot of control there, and it's funny. I think I saw, one of the questions, just because I was looking over at the screen there for a moment, and one of the best questions, which is extremely pertinent to this topic, that Edwin asked, which is what are the pros and cons of using SCCM to deploy updates, and recommendations, right? So, for me, this is something that I sometimes avoid because WSUS is a very stable product, and SCCM can be a little bit flaky at times when it comes to updates. And for me, I mean, when it comes to updates, I can't be flaky. It has to be, always applied. I need to ensure that those updates are applied properly because it's, for security and governance requirements. Now, with that said, SCCM has gotten a lot better. It is still a very good product for updates, but there you're going to find that it's a little more sluggish at times. It's a little more latent. Sometimes, sometimes you'll deploy updates to 1,000 machines and, 980 get it, 20 don't, and nobody knows why, right? So you're kind of scratching your head, trying to figure out, what went on. So it's something that you kind of have to gauge and really determine if it's something you want to risk, because, WSUS does work quite well on its own. Excuse me, I'm just going to clear my throat here. All right, sorry about that. So, when we talk about, software updates and prerequisites, I mean, there is a dependency on WSUS already. And if your WSUS infrastructure is working well as it is, and you're content and happy with it as it is, then leave it alone. I'm always of the mentality of, if it ain't broke, we don't fix it, right? Now, with that said, if you're looking for better reporting, better capabilities in the way of things like phase deployments, being able to go in and, really customize your deployments of these updates to different collections and different systems, well, you really want to use SCCM. WSUS really has kind of limitations when it comes to really large organizations. It still can be done, but it gets a lot more difficult to administer and manage. Now, automatic deployment rules, which are really quite nice, is our ability to say, okay, well, we've got, let's say updates that are coming down that we need to ensure are immediately applied to, let's say all of our laptops or all of our, computers, desktops, whatever it may be. So in those updates, we want to create an automated deployment rule that says that anytime this rule detects a critical or security update, that it's going to, automatically deploy those updates to the collections that we defined in the rule. Now, this is tough for some organizations because of the testing process, right? For me, it's sometimes tough to use automatic deployment rules because we have a rigorous testing phase that we go through with our patches, right? So we get them, we install them on our test boxes, we run them for 30 days, and then we start the process of deploying them to other, teams and systems. So sometimes it's difficult for us to use this. With that said, if you can, then, what I'm basically doing here is, saying, critical updates, let's say for the sake of example, I've got some existing templates that I can use, and I'm going to use the Patch Tuesday, template, which is a standard, patching sequence that we use in most organizations. This is going to be targeted only to, let's say, all my Windows 10, workstations, or all my desktops, or all my laptops, whichever one. And I'm now going to create a new software update group and enable this rule after this rule is run. Now I'm going to say I'm going to wake up, send Wake on LAN's, packets to my machines because I want them to get these updates no matter what. I want success and error messages, if I'm running into any problems, and I want to automatically deploy any software updates that I find defined in this rule. And what are the, the updates? Well, it could be, any, released in the last 30 days, or last 10 days, or, whatever time interval you want. I can say, anything that was deployed in the last month that had a specific severity and a specific classification, in this case here, critical and security updates, and the severity being, critical to important, let's say, out of a custom severity. So now I've defined the conditions, and I could also say, for only products like, Windows 10. Now, this is an older version of the server, as we can see here, because it doesn't have any Windows 10 options. But again, you can be very specific about, what conditions must be met for this rule to be run on those systems. Once I define that rule, I can say that I want to evaluate every 30 days effectively and run that rule on the schedule. And then my deployment schedule is going to be client local time, can be UTC if needed, and then, specify available, how soon the updates are available, and the deadline for the installation could be 7 days after those updates are made available. And then user experience, I'm going to hide those, the user doesn't need to see them. And then I'm going through and defining any additional alerts. So if compliance falls below, let's say 90%, I want to be alerted, and 7 days from the deadline. So if we're running into issues after that. Now, what I'm now doing is I'm coming in and I'm just creating a deployment package with all of the updates that I have. Now, I can choose to create that later if need be, which I'm going to do in this case here. I'm going to download and install the software updates from the distribution point to install them, even if I have to communicate with a neighboring boundary group. And then my summary of what I've done. And I've now got an automatic deployment rule that ensures that any critical or security update that's received for Windows 10 machines within the last month must be installed in 7 days from the date of availability. Even if it's beyond that 7-day period, it's going to look to install those updates right away. So you can imagine this is really quite useful when you want to automate some of the deployment options for your systems, right? And make sure that you're able to do this without much interaction. It's going to pick up on the updates and send them out for you. The biggest problem with this, though, is that if you run into problems, where an update causes volatility or adverse behavior, well, then you have to go back and figure out which update it was and, start the process of testing and validating, which is why, most organizations have a strict testing process for their updates, right? We all know that they can cause problems, and, Murphy's Law, if it can happen, it will happen, right? So, that's kind of, the amount of time we have here, this week, it really does, kind of limit what we can do. And or I should say this week today, with an hour-long lab, you can imagine that, we covered this topic in about a 5-day period. And even then, I mean, we're just, touching the tip of the iceberg in a sense. I mean, this is a product that can take, a lot of time to really fully grasp in its complexity and what you can actually do with it. The great thing about it is that, when you're here for a 5-day, you really get to see all aspects of, SCCM and all of its capabilities, and, what its limitations are and where you're going to hit pitfalls and stuff like that. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about here is just the phase deployments. And I really do, recommend that you have a look at this thing. It's something I definitely am really quite happy that they introduced. And, in this case here, what I would ultimately be doing is, setting up my patches, making sure I've downloaded my updates. And then what I'm doing is I'm simply creating a phase deployment rule. Now, unfortunately, this week, just because we have a lab environment that doesn't have any updates currently, I can't create a phase deployment for you. But, it really does give you a lot of control over the time frames of when you're deploying these updates, how you're, how long you're waiting for the next, group of systems to get them. And you can add up to 10 different phases. So it really allows you to, kind of, again, automate some of the deployment of these patches. And the phases will evaluate, success rate. So it will only proceed on to the next phase if, let's say, it was 95% successful or, more. So you can really be specific about the actual phase requirements and the next phase, when that phase starts and what conditions, what must be met in order for that to continue on. Now, guys, I know there's a lot of questions here, so let me see if I can get into a couple of these here before we finish up.
Sure thing. Sorry to interrupt you, Jared.
Yeah.
Just reminded everyone, if there's questions you want answered, I've enabled the upvote, so give it a little thumbs up, and that way it bumps everything to the top, so Jared can see the questions that are the most pressing. And again, we will be sending the presentation and a certificate to the email that you provided when you registered. All right, Jared, sorry.
Hey, no worries. Thanks, Brent. I appreciate that. So the first question I see, and let me just kind of scroll. I don't know which is the highest or which is the lowest here, but let me just check.
They're all at the top.
Okay, so let me go back up here. Okay, so mine's a little bit backwards, but anyways, I'm gonna kind of go right to the first question I have on my list here from Sudhir. How will SCCM will inventory control of software? So inventory is performed and then allows us to evaluate when an application is launched. So if for any reason, a user launches an application, every time that executable is run, then it tracks that usage in SCCM in the database. And so that we can go in and say, okay, how many times was this application run on a machine and which machines was it run on, right? And so it will actually provide me that information about, where these apps are actually being run on systems. So let's hear. What happens if a deployment is initiated, then the machine is offline? So, when it comes to the deployment being initiated, if the machine is offline at that time, it will ultimately wait until the system comes back online to obtain, the updates, the policy, and then download the policy so that the application is available. So even though a deployment is initiated, the system can be offline. When it comes online, it'll still pull the policy, still have access to the deployment, and be able to access the application as well. Do you need to wait some time before going from distribute to deploy? No, good question, Maurice. Actually, not really. I find that usually you can go right away. And it'll tell you, very quickly if there's a problem. So as long as, again, if the server is, you're deploying to distributing to a server that's in, London and we're in Ottawa, or Toronto, Canada, it could take some time, definitely at that point to distribute. But, if you're talking about fast network links and good communication between the servers, no, it should be pretty much immediate for you there. So I launched the CM. So Configuration Manager, of course, is going to be launched either through the Start menu or through your taskbar item, wherever the icon is located for you there, Dylan. Let me just go ahead and deploy images. Yeah, absolutely. SCCM is very much used to deploy Windows-based images. And, again, is a very common tool for that. Very powerful for deploying operating systems. And, that's what we use to deploy all the new OSs to all of our systems within, our environment. So absolutely, yes. Let's see here, Chandra. DC build inside of VMware, which contains Windows, Linux VMs. What is the licensing cost associated for it? Okay, so when you say DC build inside, is that a domain controller build, Jitendra? I'm just kind of trying to clarify. But yes, you can maintain your standard builds in both VMware, Hyper-V, and of course be able to deploy those to those systems as well. So yes, absolutely, you can of course support those both those systems. Yes. Is Software Center part of SCCM? Yes, it is. Absolutely, it is included by default and also installed by default with your client installation. How do we confirm the distributed content successfully? That's a good question, Maurice. How do you verify that it's there? An easy way to do that is just to go to the application itself. And if I go to the application and I go distribute, okay, you'll notice now that when I go to distribute it, if I go to my distribution points, if the distribution point has got the application, it will not list it in my list of available distribution points. So as you can see here, I don't have the DP listed anymore because I've already distributed to it, okay? All right, trying to keep up here with you guys. Got lots of questions, so let's see what else. So not the product for BIOS updates. No, not really. You want to use one of your Dell management suites or HP management suites, but you can do some BIOS updates with SCCM. Let me confirm. Okay, so these are going quick here. I'm just trying to keep building. build images of OS core load software client. Yeah, absolutely, Sadir. You can build operating system images, with your predefined images and, deploy them, right? How is sustainment set up? So Robert, when you say sustainment, I'm just trying to clarify here. I'm not sure I know what you mean by that. Let me just see if I can clear that one. Maybe you can clarify. You define the alerts. How does the system alert your email address? Yes, you have an alert subscription that you can generate, Wendy, when it comes to your alerts. So you have alert subscriptions, and that then allows you to be notified by email, SMS. There's many different, alert methods that you can be notified for. So you're just basically setting up alert subscriptions. And then once, those alert subscriptions are defined, you can configure your email notification, whatever types you want to be alerted by, okay? Holy cow, so these are just jumping. Okay, so, yeah, hardware driver updates, very good for. Let me just get rid of that one here. I had so many questions here. I'm trying to figure out which ones I can answer here. What do we got? 1252. Okay. Macros and references supply DXC instead of MSI for install DXC would be associated with DB script. You can, Pamela, deploy executables using packages. So if you don't want to create an MSI file and you want to use an executable, you can deploy executables by using a package instead of an application, or you can just simply download a product like WinInstall LE, which allows you to create an MSI file using an executable, right? So that you can use that to deploy the application. Okay, so I've got that one done here. Or into endpoint. Yeah, Jason, I don't have time to get to the depths of, cloud integration, but, Intune, endpoint protection, definitely huge facets of SCCM if you're using it. Intune being a cloud-based solution for mobile device management and endpoint protection, of course, giving us, the ability to do Windows Defender, firewall, security policies, and so on. So definitely a big piece of SCCM as well. So yeah, guys, we're kind of getting to a point here. Good question. Inventory management, should be cleaned up periodically, but you may not want to be running it as frequently as every 7 days either, because it's by default it runs every 7 days. So we normally do hardware every 30 days, and maybe software inventory a little more frequently. But you kind of pick and choose your battles there, which one's the best way to go. Yes, Hassan, SCCM does support hybrid setup and cloud integration with both Azure cloud distribution points, all types of different integration with Azure. Integrate with Azure update management. No, from what I know, Hassan, it does not integrate with Azure's update management. Yes, PowerShell and Azure migration is available with SCCM. All right, so I've talked about that one. And use the updates pending a reboot. Yes, Lee, pending reboots, updates are pending reboots. You can. There are some scripts out there that are good for that, to check pending reboots for CB servicing, for updates. But this also will tell you which systems are in a pending state as well. When we deploy production software, absolutely, you can deploy production software. And troubleshoot failed deployments, what logs are pertinent to look at. Now, yeah, you absolutely can troubleshoot failed deployments. There's a ton of different reports that you can use, right from, deployments here. You can see the deployment states, where they are, which are compliant. You can drill right down into that application deployment and find out errors in progress, maybe requirements that haven't been met. All types of different aspects of, that software deployment can be tracked. And then, of course, you've got tons of log files, that can be used to review what's going on there. Use a troubleshooter for internet connectivity. I don't know, Dr. Tiwari, about how you use troubleshooter for internet connectivity. Don't know if that really pertains here to this one, but license expiration. So guys and gals, I'd love to answer everything. Can you manage software licenses and license expiration?
Hey, Jared, let's take 2 more questions and then we'll call it quits.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop a couple more here. Can you manage software licenses and license expiration in SCCM? No, you cannot. You can monitor it, You can look at what's going on, but you cannot modify license information. You're going to have to use something like a, vamped volume activation management tool, something like that. And it's been over the software updates feature. Yes, we went through an overview of software updates. To look at, good. Yes, we have a full course, Maurice, that you can sign up for, the SCCM course. I'm sure that Brent will mention that at the end of this delivery here. And it's a great 5-day. I teach it, twice a month almost. It's a very busy course and lots of interest in it. Great course to take. It covers every aspect of SCCM pretty much. Okay, so that's about all the time I have, guys, to cover today. And I wish I could spend the time to answer the last remaining 10 questions, but I have to actually get back to teaching my other course today. So I do hope that, you guys found some benefit to what we talked about here. And, again, check out some of the offerings we have. You'll definitely find some great training here from GK when it comes to SCCM. Brent, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Jared. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and appreciate all the great questions. I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, we recommend these two courses coming up here. Perfect. That sounds about right.
Let me see if I can get that to pop up here, but it seems like...
well, you can see the deploying system center. There we go. There we go. So if you'd like to learn more about this topic, we recommend these. And as an attendee of today's webinar, we'd like to make it easy for you to take the next steps. So use these discount codes to receive 25% off your next Global Knowledge course. So you can use a Webinar 25 in the US and CA Webinar 25 in Canada. So finally, be sure to visit Global Knowledge website to access additional free resources like technical articles, white papers, and more webinars. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions today, so if you have something, please engage with us on social media. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all the good ones. So thank you all very much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.